is Sumit Bose and I am from the Bodhi Academy. Today we are going to discuss on the chapter Women, Caste and Reform. So without any further delay, let's start. Have you ever thought how children lived about 200 years ago? Nowadays, most girls from middle class families go to school and often study with boys. On growing up, many of them go to colleges and universities and take up jobs after that. They have to be adults before they are legally married, and according to law, they can marry anyone they like from any caste, community, and widows can remarry too. All women, like all men, can vote and stand for elections. Of course, there are rights are not actually enjoyed by all. Poor people have little or no access to education, and in many families, women cannot choose their husband. 200 years ago, things were very different. Most children were married off at an early age. Both Hindu and Muslim men could marry more than one wife. In some parts of the country, widows were praised if they chose death by burning themselves on the funeral pyre of their husbands. Women who died in this manner, whether willingly or otherwise, were called sati, meaning virtuous women. Women's rights to property were also restricted. Besides, most women had virtually no access to education. In many parts of the country, people believed that if a woman was educated, she would become a widow. Differences between men and women were not only ones in society. In most regions, people were divided along lines of caste. Brahmins and Kshatriyas considered themselves an upper caste. Others, such as traders and money lenders, often referred as Vaishyas, were placed after them. Then came peasants and artisans, such as weavers, potters, referred to as Sudras. At the lowest rung were those who labored to keep cities and villages clean or worked on their upper caste, considered polluting. polluting. That is, it could lead to the loss of caste status. The upper caste also treated many of these groups as the bottom of untouchable. They were not allowed to enter temples, draw water from the wells used by the upper caste, or bathe in ponds where upper caste bathed. They were seen as inferior human beings. On the 19th and 20th centuries, many of those norms and perceptions slowly changed. Let us see. Okay. Working towards change. From the early 19th century, we find debates and discussions about social customs and practices taking a new chapter. Correct. One important reason for this was the development of new forms of communication. For the first time, books, newspapers, magazines, leaflets, and pamphlets were printed. These were far cheaper and far more accessible than the manuscript that you have read in class 7. Therefore, ordinary people could read this, and many of them could also write and express their ideas in their own languages. All kinds of issues, social, political, economic, and religious, could now be debated and discussed by men in the new cities. The discussions could reach out a wider public and could become linked to movements for social change. These debates were often initiated by Indian reformers and reform groups. One such reformer was Raja Ram Mohan Roy. He founded a reform association known as the Brahmo Sabha in Calcutta. People such as Ram Mohan Roy are described as reformers because they felt that changes were necessary in the society and unjust practices needed to be done away with. They thought that the best way to ensure such changes was persuading people to give up old practices and adopt a new way of life. Raja Rammohn Roy was keen to spread the knowledge of Western education in the country and bring about greater freedom and equality for women. He wrote about the way women were forced to bear the burden of domestic work, confined to the home and the kitchen, and not allowed to move out and become educated, changing lives of widows. Rammohn Roy was particularly moved by the problems faced by the widows in their lives. He began campaign against their practice of sati. Rammohn Roy was well versed in Sanskrit, Persian, and several other Indian and European languages. He tried to show through his writing that the practice of widow burning had no sanction in ancient texts. By the early 19th century, as you have read in chapter 6, many British officials had also begun to criticize Indian traditions and customs. They were therefore more than willing to listen to Raja Ram Mohan, who was reputed to be a learned man. In 1829, sati was banned. The strategy adopted by Rammohn was used later reformers after. Whenever they wished to challenge a practice that seemed harmful, they tried to verse a sentence in the ancient sacred text and supported their point of view. Then they suggested the practice as it existed present day was early tradition. Hook swinging festival. This was one of the traditional festivals. For instance, one of the most famous reformers were Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, used the ancient text to suggest that widows could remarry. His suggestion was adopted by British officials and law was passed in 1856 permitting the widow remarriage. Those who were against the remarriage of widows opposed Vidyasagar and even boycotted him. But by the second half of the 19th century, the movement in favor of widow remarriage spread to other parts of the country. In the Telugu speaking areas of Madras Presidency, Virsalingam Pantulu formed an association time young intellectuals and reforms in the Bombay pledged themselves to working in the same cause. In the north, Swami Dayanand Saraswati founded the reform association called Arya Samaj, also support widow remarriage. Yet the number of widows who actually remarried remained low. Those who married were not easily accepted in the society. Conservative groups continued to oppose the new law. Girls began going to school. Many of the reformers felt that the education for girls was necessary in order to improve the condition of women. Vidyasagar in Calcutta and many other reformers in Bombay set up schools for girls. When the first schools were opened in the mid-19th century, many people were afraid of them. They feared that schools would take girls away from home, prevent them from doing their domestic duties. Moreover, girls had to travel through public places in order to reach school. Many people felt that this would have a corrupting influence on them. They felt that girls should stay away from public spaces. Therefore, throughout the 19th century, most educated women were taught at home by liberal fathers or husbands. Sometimes women taught themselves. Do you remember? Have you read about Rasundari Devi about both social and political life last year? She was the one of those who secretly learned to read and write in the flickering light of candles at night. In the latter part of the century, schools for girls were established by the Arya Samaj in Punjab and Jyotirao Phule in Maharashtra. In aristocratic Muslim households in North India, women learned to read the Quran in Arabic. They were taught by women who came home to teach. Some reformers, such as Mumtaz Ali, reinterpreted verses from the Quran to argue for women's education. The first Urdu novels began to be written from the 19th century. Amongst other things, these were meant to encourage women to read about religion and domestic management in a language they could understand. Women write about women. From the early 20th century, Muslim women like the Begums of Bhopal played a notable role in promoting education among women. They founded a primary school for girls at Aligarh. Another remarkable woman, Begum Sakhawat Hussain, started schools for Muslim girls in Patna and Calcutta. She was fearless critic of conservative ideas, arguing that religious leaders of every faith accorded an inferior place to women. By the 1880s, Indian women began to enter universities. Some of them trained to be doctors, some became teachers. Many women began to write to publish their critical views of place and women in society. Tarabai Shinde, a woman educated at home at Pune, published a book, Sri Purush Tulna. Pandita Ramabai, a great scholar of Sanskrit, felt that Hinduism was oppressive towards women and wrote a book about the miserable lives of upper Hindu women. She founded a widows' home at Pune to provide shelter to widows who had been treated badly by their husbands' relatives. Here, women were trained so that they could support themselves economically. Needless to say, all this more than alarmed the Orthodox. For instance, many Hindu nationalists felt that Hindu women were adopting Western ways and that is would corrupt Hindu culture and erode family values. Orthodox Muslims also worried about the impact about these changes. As you can see, by the end of 19th century, women themselves were actively working for reform. They wrote books, edited magazines, founded schools and training centers, and set up women's associations. From the early 20th century, they formed political pressure groups to push through laws of female suffrage and better health care and education for women. Some of them joined various kinds of nationalist and socialist movement from 1920s. In the 20th century, leaders such as Jawaharlal Nehru, Subhash Chandra Bose lent their support to demands for greater equality and freedom for women. Nationalist leader promised that there would be full suffrage for all men and women after independence. However, till then, they asked women to concentrate on anti-British struggles. Caste and social reform. Some of the social reforms we have been discussing also criticized caste inequalities. Ram Mohan Roy translated an old Buddhist text that was critical of caste. The Prarthana Samaj adhered the tradition of bhakti that believes in spiritual equality of all castes. In Bombay, the Paramahans Mandali was founded in 1840 to work from the abolition of caste. Many of these reforms and members of reform associations were people of upper caste. Often in secret meetings, these reforms would violate caste taboos and food and touch in an effort to get rid of old caste prejudice in their life. There were also others who questioned the injustices of caste social order. During the course of the 19th century, Christian missionaries began setting up schools in the tribal groups of lower caste children. These children were the unequipped with some resources to make their way into changing world. At the same time, the poor began leaving their villages to look for jobs were opening in cities. There was work in factories and there that were coming and jobs in municipalities. Okay, think of new demands and labor this created. Drains had to be dug, roads laid, building construction. So many things were going on that time. Okay, this required coolies, diggers, carriers, bricklayers, planquin bearers, rickshaw pullers. Where did this labor come from? The poor from the villages and small towns, many of them low caste, began moving to cities where there was new demand for labor. Some also went to work in plantations in Assam, Mauritius, Trinidad, and Indonesia. Work in the new locations was often very hard, but the poor The people from low caste saw this as an opportunity to get away the oppressive hold of upper caste. Landowners exercised over their lives and daily humiliation suffered. There were other jobs too. The army, for instance, offered opportunities. A number of Mahar people who were regarded as untouchable founded jobs in Mahar regiment. The father B.R. Ambedkar, the leader of the Dalit movement, taught at an army school. Demands for equality and justice. Gradually, by the second half of the 19th century, people from within the non-Brahmin caste began organizing movements against caste discrimination and demanded social equality and justice. The Satnami movement in central India was founded by Ghasidas, who worked among the leather workers and organized movement to improve their social status. In eastern Bengal, Haridas Thakur's Matua sect worked among Chandala cultivators. Haridas questioned Brahmical texts that supported the caste system. In the present day Kerala, a guru of Izhava caste. In the present day Kerala, guru of Izhava caste, Sri Narayan Guru, proclaimed the ideals of unity of those people. He argued against the training people inequality on the basis of caste differences. According to him, all humankind belong to the same caste. One of his famous statements were, Oru Jati, Oru Matam, Oru Davyam Mungeshu. One caste, one religion, one God, and for humankind. All these sects were founded by leaders who came from non-Brahmin caste and worked amongst them. They tried to change those habits and practices which provoked the contempt of dominant caste. They tried to create a sense of self-esteem among the subordinate caste. Gulamgiri. One of the most vocal amongst low caste leaders was Jyotirao Phule, born in 1827. He studied in schools set up by Christian missionaries. On growing up, he developed his own ideas about the injustices of caste society. He set out to attack the Brahmins, claim and they were superior to others since they were Aryans. Phule argued that the Aryans were foreigners who came from outside the subcontinent and defeated and subjugated the true children of the country, those who had lived here from the before of the coming of the Aryans. As the Aryans established their dominance, they began looking at the defeated population as inferior, as low caste people. According to Phule, the upper caste had no right of their land and power. In reality, the land belonged to the indigenous people. This is so-called low castes. Phule claimed that before Aryan rule, there existed a golden age when warrior peasants tilled the land and ruled the Maratha countryside in just as fair. He proposed that Shudras and Ati Shudras could unite challenge caste discrimination. The Satyadhak Samaj, an association Phule founded, propagated caste equality. In 1873, Phule wrote a book named Gulamgiri, meaning slavery. Some 10 years before this, American Civil War had been fought, leading to the end of slavery in America. Phule dedicated his book to all those Americans who had fought for free slaves, thus establishing a link between conditions of the lower caste in India and black slaves in America. As the example shows, Phule extended his criticism of the caste system to argue against all forms of inequality. He was concerned about the plight of the upper caste women, the ministers of the labor, and humiliation of the low caste. The movement for caste reform was continued in 20th century by the other great Dalit leaders like Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the Western India, E.V. Rameshwaran Naikar in South. temples. Who could enter temples? Ambedkar was born into a Mahar family. As a child, he experienced what caste prejudice meant in everyday life. In school, he was forced to sit outside the classroom on the ground and was not allowed to drink water from the taps and upper caste children used. After finishing school, he got a fellowship to go to US for higher studies. On his return to India in 1919, he wrote extensively upper caste power contemporary society. In 1927, Ambedkar started a temple entry movement in which his Mahar caste followers participated. Brahmin priests were outraged when the Dalits used water from the temple tank. Ambedkar led three such movements for temple entry between 1927 to 1935. His aim was to make everyone see the power of caste prejudice within society. The non-Brahmin movement. In the early 20th century, the non-Brahmin movement started. The initiative came from those non-Brahmin castes that had acquired access to education, wealth, and influence. They argued that Brahmins were heirs of Aryans invaders from the north who had conquered southern lands from the original inhabitants of the region, the indigenous Dravidian races. They also challenged Brahminical claims to power. E.V. Ramaswamy Naikar, or Periyar as he was called, came from middle class family. Interestingly, he had been an ascetic in his early life and had studied Sanskrit scriptures carefully. Later, he became a member of Congress, only to leave in disgust when he found that a feast organized by nationalists, seating arrangements followed by caste distinctions, that is, the lower caste, were made to sit distance from the upper caste. Convinced that untouchables had to fight for their dignity, Periyar founded the self-respect movement. He argued that untouchables were the true upholders of an original Tamil and Dravidian culture which had been subjugated by Brahmins. He felt that all religions authorities saw social divisions and inequality as God-given. Untouchables had to free themselves, therefore, from all religions in or achieve social equality. Periyar was an outspoken critic of Hindu scriptures, especially to the codes of Manu, the ancient lawgiver, and the Bhagavad Gita and Ramayana. He said that these texts had been used to establish the authority of Brahmins over lower caste and the domination of men over women. These assertions did not go unchallenged. The forceful speeches, writings, and movements of lower caste leaders did lead to rethinking and self-criticism among upper caste nationalist leaders. But Orthodox Hindu society also reacted by founding Sanatan Dharma Sabhas and Bharat Dharma Mahamandal in the north. The associations like Brahman Sabha in Bengal, the object of these associations was to uphold caste distinctions as a cornerstone of Hinduism and show how this was sanctified by scriptures. Debates and struggles over caste continues beyond the colonial period and are still going on their times. Okay. I hope you all understood the chapter. For more information and details, please contact the Bodhi Academy.